Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, before I begin today's interview, I wanted to give a big shout out to my friends at HireAct, who are kindly sponsoring the Tech Talks Daily Podcast this month. And one of the things that I love about HireAct is it takes everyone away from that dreaded email inbox and waiting around for responses. And the HireAct app uses advanced data technology to efficiently match job seekers and recruiters, all based on their preferences and behaviour. So you ultimately get curated candidate recommendations that fit your job requirements. You can chat directly with ideal candidates and accelerate the hiring process up to 10 times faster than those traditional ways. And we've all experienced the pain points around that. Anything that eases pressure on the already bulging inbox and waiting around for replies, worrying if it's gone to the spam folder, has to be a great thing. So if chatting and interviewing candidates anytime, anywhere, and hiring quickly sounds appealing, please download the HireAct app. That's HIRECT. It's totally free and you can download it on the Apple and Google Play Store. Give it a try. Let me know what you think. Email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. But on with today's show.
Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I have a great guest for your listening pleasure today. Because you know when I always say technology works best when it brings people together? Well, today's guest lives and breathes that. And he always puts people at the heart of the tech industry. And his name is Jason Illian, Managing Director of Koch Disruptive Technologies, KDT, which is also an investment unit of Koch Industries. And for those people listening wanting to look them up, Koch is spelled Koch. Now, Jason is a former entrepreneur who's got 20 plus years of experience leading and building technology companies, and he has been in the current role since, I think, 2017. But he's going to be sharing today how KDT is partnering with startups and investing in disruptive technologies that are, as a result, transforming Koch and society as a whole. But there are some pretty big numbers here too. I mean, since 2003, Koch has invested $133 billion in growth and improvements. In the last 6 years alone, have spent $30 billion on technology investments and acquisitions. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Kansas so we can speak with Jason about all this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. My name is Jason Illian. I'm one of the managing directors for Koch Disruptive Technologies, which is the venture and growth arm of Koch Industries. If you know anything about Koch, it's roughly one of the largest privately held companies in the US with 120 billion plus in revenue a year. And we operate in 65 countries. So we're a little bit all over the place, but I specifically work in the growth and venture arm. So we're looking at disruptive next generation platform companies that will not only disrupt us, but disrupt others and hopefully create a better society.
Fantastic. And before all that, I'm going to ask you to go back in time a little here and ask you to share your origin story. Can you remember where your passion for technology came from and what it was that put you on this path?
Yeah, I actually can. It's an interesting story. And, I often find with some of the entrepreneurs that we talk to and investors, there's always these really intriguing, interesting stories. I don't know if mine's that intriguing, but I actually studied and started with a background in finance. And as you and I were talking about before, spent time in London, came back to the States and was doing international finance. This was late 90s, early 2000s. And while I was doing this, we were making investments, and a lot of my friends were in these wave one technology companies, right? They were starting companies like Napster and Friendster. Like Friendster was the first social network, right? Yeah. And I remember watching the internet at the time, and it was just flat, right? I mean, we just went to the internet for information. There was even this time, it sounds crazy, but people were like, who would ever put their credit card on the internet, right? Like who would ever, that's wild madness. But I was watching what was happening, and it was going from just this place where we went for information to was becoming relational and it was becoming transactional. And I was thinking, and as I was spending time with my friends in the Bay Area and New York and around the world having conversations, I realized something's happening. Wasn't smart enough to know exactly what it was, but to say, hey, something's happening. If this becomes transactional and relational, it changes the way we interact with one another and how we're going to do business. And so I left finance. I started diving into the tech world. One of my friends was starting a company at the time called Handango. And believe it or not, Handango was the first app store for phones. It was an app store for Nokia phones, right? It's predated the Apple App Store, right? And so watched him that he was building that, watched how Friendster was providing this social networking and letting people connect to one another and talk around the world. And really what it is, it just drew me in to technology. And so I spent the next 20 years as a tech entrepreneur, building tech companies. One of my first companies was a video company that operated in the faith and Christian space that sold to Salem Communications, built another company that was in the ebook space that sold to a private equity group, and really just got the bug for saying, how can we build scalable platforms that make the world a better place? And you can do that through certainly content, but today there's ways to do it through medicine and AI and agriculture and all sorts of things. And so that's how I got into this. And all of that led me to KDT, where now that I've spent years being an entrepreneur and have all the scars to prove it, I'm on the other side, getting a chance to help entrepreneurs hopefully make the world a better place.
What a great story. And as you said, that path led you to KDT, which is partnering with startups and investing in disruptive technologies that are playing a big part in transforming our world. But for people that are hearing about you for the first time, I'll do that bit again, sorry. But can you tell me a little bit more about what makes you a unique investing firm, or what makes you different from all those others out there at the moment in the tech industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some of that comes back to what makes Koch unique, right?
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, Koch was unique because it's still privately held. Unlike a lot of other companies as they grow that have gone public and have split off, they've continued to hold it private for a couple of reasons. One is when you're private, you can make adjustments and do wild and crazy things, and nobody punishes you in the stock market, right? Because it's your company. And so Koch has continued to grow over the years. And as we've grown, we realized the very thing that made Koch successful, the entrepreneurship, the innovation, the disruption, the empowering people and pushing decision rights to the people closest. As we've gotten bigger, we've realized, hey, we need to not only do that with our own companies, but how do we help others do that as well? And so part of building Koch Disruptive Technologies was the brainchild of Chase Koch, who is our president here at KDT, and the team to say, let's invest in other ones that are building these next generation platforms. And so there's a lot of money out there. I think there's a lot of really great investors, and your listeners probably know a bunch of them by name. But really how we try to differentiate ourselves is we can write a check, as small as $1 million or $2 million and as big as hundreds of millions of dollars. We can cross over almost any investment theme, whether that's blockchain or AI or agriculture or Industry 4.0. But what differentiates us is we don't see ourselves just as an investor. We see ourselves as a partner. We want to come alongside a firm and say, in addition to the capital, what else do you need to be successful? And because we have 150,000 employees in 65 countries, we've built a team in-house called Koch Labs, and their job is to come alongside our companies and help them grow. And that can be with commercial relationships, that can be with resources, that can be with insights and knowledge. So it's not just the money. You certainly need capital if you're going to build a scalable platform. But what else do you need? You need insights, right? You need introductions. You need a number of other things that can really help you accelerate. And so our job is not to be the fastest check at the table or to just deploy the most capital. Our job is to literally come alongside and say, how do we walk with those great entrepreneurs? And because we're investing off our own balance sheet, we're not held by any time frame. We don't need a liquidation event in 3 years or 5 years and 7 years. If this is a great company, we'll hold it for 10, 20, 30, whatever the case is, because we want it to be more successful. And so I think that makes us unique. And we also just have a real strong mindset of mutual benefit. So mutual benefit, not only with the companies we invest in, but also with other investors. We don't assume that we're the smartest people in the room. We try to bring other smart people to the table at any time and partner with them. We just think that a high tide raises all ships.
Yeah, it reminds me of that saying, if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room, right?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, that didn't happen to me too often, so I don't have to worry about that.
And before you came on the podcast, I was doing a bit of research on you to see if there's anything else that really stood out or made you unique. And one of the things that really stood out for me was your philosophy on creative destruction and how it can guide a company's bets on transformative technologies that will bring them that long-term success to itself and its partners. But for people obviously just hearing about you for the first time, can you expand on that philosophy of creative destruction?
Yeah, I mean, creative destruction is a term that was originally coined by Joseph Schumpeter. And the idea is how do you innovate and disrupt yourself before the market does? So maybe a crude but easy example is like you can either take the gun out and shoot yourself in the foot and limp and it's kind of hard to move, or you can hand it to the market and let it shoot you in the chest, right? And what's happening is that the world is moving and changing faster than ever. And those companies that aren't disrupting themselves, that aren't actively creating a new S curve of growth, they're just becoming extinct. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that you were going to Blockbusters for movies, right? It wasn't that long ago that you were shopping at Sears, right? It wasn't that long ago that you just get a taxi. And I remember the first pitch of somebody coming in and saying, hey, there's going to be this day where you pick up your cell phone and the stranger picks you up in his car and takes you wherever you want to go. I remember the people in the room saying, this guy's crazy. But now it's just how we do life, right? It's just ride sharing. And we can go on and on and on with Airbnb and a number of other things that have changed the way we've done life. These are companies that have embraced creative destruction. And Koch Industries in itself believes we've got to continue to disrupt ourselves, because if we don't, we will be disrupted by the market and you won't know our name in 15 or 20 years either. And so not only do we want to do that to ourselves, we want to empower other ones and partner with other great companies so that they can continue to innovate internally. And that's hard to do, right? It's hard to let go of something that you know, and it's, taking you from A to B. Who's going to take you from B to C or B to D? And so that creative destruction is really baked into our DNA, and our senior management is continually reminding us that every day we've got to stay a little bit uncomfortable. And I think that's just a good life lesson too, right? We all got to be a little bit uncomfortable because people love change until it's their turn to change.
I completely agree with you. And I was chatting earlier today with a company called Flytrex, and they were focusing on drone deliveries. And there's a side of me that was thinking, well, everyone's talking about this, but it's never going to happen. Then he showed me this viral video, I think in North Carolina, where one of these drones delivered a drone delivered a cup of Starbucks without spilling it to the person. Right. And you think, well, that will one day become the norm. And then there's autonomous vehicles. A few years ago, I would have said, well, that's never going to happen. But then when I went to Arizona and I'm seeing these cars with no drivers going up and down the highway there, you constantly got to shift your mindset, haven't you?
Yeah. And I think that as we think about this, is the things that seemed crazy to us are coming at us faster than ever, right? And so we're going to look back in 10 or 15 years and not even believe that the massive amount of changes that have happened in our society, and hopefully most for the good. But what that's going to do is it's going to continue to turn over the current jobs, turn over the opportunities. And so the great minds, the great thinkers, the great leaders will embrace that and just say, we are going to continuously innovate and change. And the cultures and countries that do that well will be on the leading edge of it. The ones that don't are going to be trying to play a game of catch up.
But despite all that, since a young boy watching the Olympics in Los Angeles all those years ago in the 80s, I'm still waiting for my jetpack. I don't know if that's ever going to turn up.
Hey, I'd still like one of those as well. And believe me, my 9-year-old son keeps asking me when I'm going to dress like Iron Man and have one of those outfits. So as soon as I get the Iron Man outfit, you and I can go and fly those things around. How's that?
We'll make that happen. And something else I think we've got to highlight here with the kind of work that you're doing is that since 2003, I believe that Koch has invested $133 billion in growth and improvements. And in the last 6 years have spent $30 billion on technology investments and acquisitions. So do you have any big success stories that you can share with us today, just to bring everything to life for the listener?
Yeah, I mean, those are big numbers, right?
Yeah.
And Koch has experienced a lot of success over the years, which I'd love to take credit for, but frankly, I'm just kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, because one of the things that Koch and the leadership's done a great job is how do we shatter the status quo and continue to grow in ways that make even us uncomfortable? And so a lot of people think about growth as, well, if you're in 5G, how do you grow in 5G? Or if you're in a particular field like energy, how do you stay in energy? And Koch just doesn't think like that. How we think is in terms of how do we scale our capabilities? Meaning, if you're good at oil and gas engineering, how do you then become good at engineering and software or electrical engineering? So we take a capability and we move it horizontally across industries. And when you do that, all of a sudden it unlocks new opportunities. And those new opportunities create what we call a virtuous cycle, because you invest in people and those people unlock opportunities and they create new networks. And then that flywheel starts to spin. And that's really been key to Koch growth is we invest in great people. We try to empower them to make decisions. And as they make those decisions, and if they're good, we give them even more decision rights and encourage them to not only have a sense of self-actualization to say, hey, what is Jason particularly good at? But then how does Jason put other people around him that are good at areas that he's not? And so it's a continuous virtuous cycle of team building, company building. And as those continue to spin, it just spins off more companies and opportunities, right? And so what most people don't know is that Koch has become more of a technology company than anything else over the years. And I see us continuing to move down that path because we now have hundreds of technology investments, roughly 40 or so just within KDT alone over the last few years. And our group, KDT's, put almost $2 billion to work in all sorts of things from life sciences to industrial automation, to as well as things in AI and machine learning. And so that flywheel is going to continue to spin because we're always looking for those great people. And if you invest in great people and you believe in them and you have unlimited time frames and you're willing to bring resources to the table, good things typically happen. Now, you also have issues, but I think those opportunities that things don't work well, those are learning opportunities. And we try to not pass those up, but instead learn on those each step of the way, so that our goal is always to have Koch Industries double in size every 5 to 6 years. And so far, we've been successful doing that.
Fantastic. And of course, they also say that we all become the average of the five people that we spend the most time with. I'm curious, as a company, how have you learned from and empowered different technology when you're surrounded by some of the best minds in the world there with your work?
It's a good question. And I think one of the things that great minds and interesting people do is they ask a lot of questions, right? I don't know if you've been around the people that come into a room and they're just asking constant questions. And I've seen this pop up time and time again with some of not only the great CEOs, but also the great teams. And we're not looking to invest in the genius with 1,000 helpers. We don't want a celebrity CEO who loves to see his face on magazines. Now, if that happens, I'm not opposed to it, but that shouldn't be the end goal. The end goal should be, how do we build companies, goods and services that improve people's lives? And when you come across an entrepreneur that does that, we often find he or she tries to hire people smarter than himself or better than himself. They want to be the one that is empowering other ones. And so we've learned that by doing that, they become a light, which just attracts other people to them. And then they build companies that have significant impact. And we've seen that time and time again. I know one of the companies in our portfolio, called Trackonomy. The first time I met with Eric, the CEO, we were supposed to meet for 30 minutes just to have tea. 3 hours later, we're still talking. And he goes, "You haven't asked about my company yet." And I said, "It's because he's so interesting, right? Building Dutch schools in the Bay Area because he has a passion for it and helping kids with other needs." And I'm like, this guy's fascinating. He just cared about others. And then we got to his company stuff. And I realized he's going to care about his people like he cares about other people, because that's just part of his DNA. And I can go down the list of our CEOs that are like that because we have a number of them. And I think they're special. And so I find myself wanting to be around, to steal your idea, those type of 5 people, 5 entrepreneurs or 5 leaders that have really special abilities to touch people's lives. And out of that then comes these new technologies, and those technologies then can scale almost infinitely.
Wow, what an amazing answer there. It's great to hear those insights from everyone that you've met. And of course, there's so many different emerging technologies that we're seeing on headlines as we're scrolling up and down news feeds just about every single day. For me, one of the most exciting things is how they're all beginning to converge somewhat and how that will create new opportunities. But are there any emerging technologies that excite you right now?
Yeah, so I would say there's a couple things. So we just made an announcement today in 2 new companies that we invested in. We invested in a company called Immune AI. It's an Israeli immune system mapping startup, right? So think about mapping the immune system, of really being able to use technology and data to determine very specifically how your body works or how my body works. You got to remember, in the past, we were just basically throwing the same drug at all of us. Like, we're all built the same. Let's just throw the same drug out at all of us and see what happens, versus saying, what if we had individual health and genetic ways to attack diseases, attack issues and problems? And so one of the areas we're excited about is life sciences. I think you're going to see the next decade really be a Cambrian explosion of life sciences and opportunities, but those won't give us all the solutions that we want overnight. This is going to take longer, right? We're not just building apps anymore. We're not just building games. We're literally trying to understand the human body and how technology and data and information can help us make better biological decisions. So I think that's an area that's really interesting. Another area that I'm spending a lot of time is in blockchain and crypto. Yeah. Not just because I'm excited about trading coins and stuff, but think about having decentralized technologies that you own your own data, you own your own medical data, you own your own content that you put out there, and you decide how you want others to use that content and build on top of it. We're in the really early innings of kind of the picks and shovels of building out those pieces inside of that. But that's going to launch an entirely new wave of companies. Some of them will stay kind of centralized technologies like we know today, but there will be a day when we have a decentralized social network where we all still connect, but it's not owned by a Facebook. It's not owned by some other big player. It's owned by the people, right? And you have freedom to speak and act within of that. So I think having these decentralized technologies and how we exchange value across those, whether you believe in Bitcoin specifically or Ether or whatever, there's going to be ways for us to transact in real time without centralized banking systems, and trusted ways that we have and can empower one another. And I think it's not only good for places like the US and the UK, it's good for all sorts of countries, because it creates a more stabilized global economy, because we have a common thread that we can trade through. And listen, we are on, step 3 of 912. So we are not anywhere near where we need to be yet, but it's heading in a good direction. And it's exciting to see the type of talent that's moving to those 2 areas. And this is what I often tell investors and other great entrepreneurs. If you want to see what's happening next, just watch where you think the smartest people are going. Mm-hmm. And when I see them going to life sciences, when I see them going to blockchain, my natural thing is, because I'm not very smart, follow them, right? Mm-hmm. Where are they going, and see what they're working on.
And as for the blockchain and crypto space, there is so many amazing projects in there that are leveraging technology to make a real difference and transform the future. And then equally, despite all those projects having such great investment, so many great minds, a dog meme token will suddenly go to the moon overnight. Does a part of you die when you see that, or do you just find it amusing?
Yeah, well, so listen, whether it's the Dogecoin, or we're going to talk crypto kitties, or we're going to talk, right, apes, all of this crazy madness, right? There's going to be a lot of stuff that goes to zero. So let's be honest, like, some of this stuff it's just proof of concept. We're still just trying to figure out, how does this work? And so money will be made by few, money will be lost by many, right? And so people that are being early investors have to know that we've lived through this before. Like, anybody that's been an investor that lived through the late 90s or early 2000s, people got wiped out, right? And then it happened again in 2008, people got wiped out. And The young entrepreneurs of today have only lived in an upcycle. They have yet to see a correction. That's coming. This will correct, right? It can't go up and to the right forever. Now, will it look like the previous ones? It's hard to say. But what you're seeing right now of money getting thrown into all sorts of companies, and it feels like, to your point, is like, hey, buy the coin at 1 cent and tomorrow it's $100. What does it do? Well, we don't know, but it's worth $100, right? That sounds crazy, right? And that will fix itself over time, because people will naturally gravitate to the things that add long-term value to them. Those will continue to be sustainable. And the other things we'll look at as just building blocks, stepping stones to where we're going.
Yeah, it's such a great point. And I think that's one of the things that's going to challenge us all is our perception of value. You know, we can look at the Mona Lisa and say, well, yes, that is worth X amount of money because of the history and the quality and the value, etc. But an NFT is now coming into the equation. Most of the people in the world can't get their head around it. I might be one of those. And I'm really, why is that? That JPEG just sold for 3.8 million, you know?
Right. Well, but it's a good question. It's a question we have to ask ourselves of like, it's easy for us to determine value just based on me individually, what I determine value.
Yeah.
But it's harder to get out of our own shoes and out of our own way. So as an example, I'm not a big gamer, right? So I don't spend a lot of time in various video games. But when you go spend time in that culture, you begin to realize gamers value being able to take a sword or a shield or a personality and move it from one game to the next. In the past, that was only able to stay within that ecosystem. But what if via NFT, via decentralized systems, you could take whatever you own digitally and move it across ecosystems? Wow. Well, what has that happened? The answer is we don't know, because we're just starting to figure that out. But you have seen on things like, Axie Infinity and NBA Top Shots and all sorts of things where people do value having some digital ownership. Now, my parents, who can barely run the DVD player, they have no idea what's happening right now, right? Yeah. And there will come a day where you and I are in that same boat, where if we're not continually refreshing ourselves and being surrounded by people that are innovators, we're not going to get it either. But you really have to step into other people's ecosystem to understand what's of value to them and what's going to drive long-term value as well. And that's hard to do. It's really hard to do. It's something you have to challenge yourself on a daily basis.
It really is. Isn't it? I suspect if you were to go to any of those huge communities that are passionate about NFTs and digital collectibles, they would think it's absolutely crazy that we used to have shelves of DVDs and CDs that were worth something back in the day as well.
But we all need crazy friends. Right? We all need some crazy friends that would make us go do something that we're like, I didn't really want to do this, but later you're like thankful that you did. Yeah. And so I think that's part of investing and also building companies is, it sounds crazy today, and it just may be how we do life tomorrow.
Absolutely. And if we do have any startup founders listening to us today, obviously they want to appear on your radar. What should they be doing right now? What kind of thing are you looking for? And also, what should they not be doing as well?
Sure. One of the things I always tell people that are coming to pitch, not only us, but any investor, is when you come to pitch, come with a sense of humility. We want you to know that you're passionate about what you're doing, but we know that you don't have all the answers. And if you come acting like you have all the answers, it is a huge red flag for us, because that's not intellectual honesty, right? You need intellectual honesty, and you also need something I call cognitive flexibility to know I'm going to have to grow and change and iterate as the market changes around me. So we want to find a founder that has a sense of humility and intellectual honesty. We also want that person to understand that they need to be part of a team, right? It used to be you look for 3 people when building a startup, the hacker, the hustler, and the designer, right? The hacker was, who's your CTO? Like, who's the computer whiz that can help you understand the tech? The hustler was, who's the business person, right? And the designer was, who's going to make this usable and somebody actually wants to be able to use it and make it look pretty, right? Because you need user experience, you need strong technology, and you need to have a business plan. Those things have never changed. So I still look for those elements, whether that's in 3 people or 5 or 10 or whatever the number is. I look for those elements with the founding team. And then from there, I'm looking for something that's going to be highly disruptive, which we talked about earlier. Is it something that is not just going to be incrementally better than what's happening today, but is it going to be a step change better than anything that we know about? And if it's hard for me to get my head around, that's okay. I'll spend time trying to learn and make sure I understand that, but it's got to be significantly better. And then it's got to be scalable. It's got to be a true platform. Most venture capitalists and other groups, they're not looking for a 10 or $20 million a year company. Those are great companies and we need those, but they're not investable from very large investors. We have to have something that's scalable. It can potentially, touch hundreds of millions or billions of people. And so we're looking for that. Now, that being said, is we know up front, most people are not going to have that day one. And it's just the vision for can they get there? And do they have a sense of what it's going to take to get there? And then it just comes down to, are we the best partner to help you go do that? Sometimes we are, and sometimes we're not. Or sometimes we need to grab 3 friends that have better comparative advantages and resources to help us help our entrepreneurs. So it's that combination that we're always looking for, but humility is a big deal.
And as we get towards the end of 2021, there's a lot of talk about the blurred lines now between our online world and offline world. There's talk of building a metaverse and replicating our real world online. And then we've got NFTs, blockchain, crypto, and also sustainability entering a huge focus on that right now. So what's going to be your focus in 2022? Is there anything you can share on the kind of things you're going to be looking for and working on?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of the same stuff that we talked about, but I think the beginning of the focus starts with people. Yeah. Right. That we're going to find and continue to look for great people that we can invest in for the long term. And that starts with, from our side and from our entrepreneur side, is we're looking for people with a sense of curiosity. Right. They're curious about what's coming, and they are not afraid to get their hands dirty and go experiment and test stuff out. So that will be more in the life sciences. Obviously, that will be more in blockchain and crypto, but it will continue to be in cybersecurity as well, because of the more that we're doing out there, the more chances that things can get hacked. Right. Yeah. There's just more attack surface now than ever before. So we have to figure out ways to guard against our data, which is in your best interest and my best interest and everyone around the world, that we're protecting the data. Because if there are good guys out there, there's certainly bad people that are also trying to get to that. So I think cyber is another one. And then an area that we also focus on is just helping understand the supply chain. I think we all understood that we had big supply chain problems with this pandemic, and we're all beginning to realize, like, hey, why are the shelves not as full as they used to be? Well, how do we better automate the supply chain? How do we make sure that good A is getting from A to B, but it's also being done in a way that's helping both the climate and the people, right? We don't want anything coming from people that are enslaved or in dire situations. We want to make sure we can track everything from the inception all the way to the shelf. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for a place like Koch Industries to participate and help automate and create visibility in there. And so we want to partner with great companies in that space as well. So I wouldn't say it's one focus. I would say there's a bunch of micro focuses that all come back to great people with shared vision and values and complementary capabilities.
Well, we've covered a lot today. We began our conversation talking about your origin story. I'm now going to have a bit of fun with you and ask you, what was the soundtrack to your origin story and your career in tech? Is there one song or piece of music that keeps reoccurring or just helps you get your head in the zone? And if you've got a song and a story, we'll add that song to our Spotify playlist. Yeah,
so it's interesting because the song that's been on my mind recently is a song called Hills and Valleys by an artist by the name of Torrin Wells. And one, it's just a great piano piece if you've ever heard it. My daughter's learning how to play it, so it's definitely back in my mind now because I keep hearing her play it in the office recently. But in the song, there's a few lines that says, When I'm on the mountaintop, I'll remember that I didn't get here on my own, which I think is hugely important to all of us. And then when I'm in the valley, to know that I'm not alone when I'm in the valley, right? And listen, there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be hills and valleys with every investor and with every company. We often talk about, hey, look at that company went up and to the right. But if you sit down there and unpack it, there were hills and valleys and times that entrepreneur didn't know if he or she was going to make it. And it's really important to us, and to me as well, specifically, is we got to care and take care of our people. The world's not always friendly. And we often forget that everybody we interact with is going through some type of personal battle and fight. And so how do we truly care for them? Not just as investors, but as friends, and ask those questions. How are you doing? Not because it's small talk, but because we care. Like, we want to know the answer. And, if you have 5 people in your life that you're around, those 5 are often the people that care about you, right? They're the people that want to truly know how you're doing, not because you have a super successful podcast, which you do, not because I've invested well, which I have, but because they love us as people. They see past the warts and problems and scars and challenges, and they just love us for us. And I think that is our job. Our job is as much of putting capital to work as about caring about those people and taking care of them. And when we do that, you can make it through the hills and valleys.
Wow, what a powerful moment to end on. But before I do let you go, for anyone wanting to find out more information about KDT and the work that you're doing, or contact your team, or connect with you on LinkedIn, well, what's the best way of doing that?
Yeah, the best way is, if you want to check out what we're doing with Koch Disruptive Technologies, just go to kochdisrupt.com. That's our website. You'll be able to see any of the companies that we're investing in, also see our investment thesis and a lot of the things we've talked about. We lay out our philosophy there. And if they want to connect with me, they can find me on Twitter at Jason Illian, or at LinkedIn at Jason Illian as well. So I'm always happy to, as we said, talk to smarter and more passionate people than myself. So always open.
Love that. And if we look back at our conversation, there's some big numbers: 133 billion in growth and improvements in the last 6 years, and spending over 30 billion on technology investments and acquisitions. And then we've got your fantastic philosophy on creative destruction there, and the difference that you're helping with your partners. But more than anything, I think it's your powerful story that ties it all together, and that belief in people. Because I always say at the end of every episode, technology works best when it brings people together rather than just distracting them. And you guys seem to be the exact embodiment of that. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing that with me today.
Well, I appreciate your time. And I love what you said. In fact, our CEO, Charles, just released a book called Believe in People. That was the name of the book. And so it does tie it all well together. And I think that's the best place to end, because that's the place we start.
What I loved about chatting with Jason today is, yes, we talked about disruptive tech and some pretty big numbers along the way too, such as investing 133 billion in growth and improvement since 2003. And in the last 6 years, 30 billion on technology investments and acquisitions. But what really shined throughout all that is his passion for people. That's so refreshing to hear in the tech industry. So if you're a startup founder, or somebody working in tech, or a business leader, whoever you are, if anything we discussed today resonated with you, please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So finally, a big thank you to Jason for being a great guy, agreeing to come on the podcast, share his story, and an even bigger thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in every single day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I appreciate you all more than you could possibly know. So please keep those messages coming in, and I'll join you again tomorrow. I'll be lurking in your podcast feed. So thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.